Are we ready to start? Okay, so this, again, these are all more or less self-contained talks. So what I wanted to talk about is what is known in the East as the 8 principal passions. If you come from a Western background, you may think this looks a lot like the 7 deadly vices, and there is a reason for that. They're very closely related. I give like I give a course on this that takes like about 10 hours. So I'm doing the Reader's Digest version here. But, you know, just to start off, and like, what is a passion? It's funny because we use the word in English as a positive, right? It's like I have a passion for life, I have a passion for golf, you know, whatever. But it really comes from the Greek pasco, which is like I suffer or I experience, okay? And the pascha, you know, is this, it actually comes from the suffering of Christ. So it's the 3-day pascha, right? It's the crucifixion, the time in the grave on the Sabbath, which is the Sabbath, because it's his rest in the grave, and then Pascha, the resurrection. But so a passion is basically this, in the Orthodox sense, in which it is basically a negative, is a thing that we suffer. And so there's the innocent passions, which Christ had, like hunger, thirst, pain. And there's the non-innocent passions. And they are these. Normally in the 8 principal passions, and one of the main places you would find this is in St. John Cassian. It's a pretty easy, you know, shorthand by Orthodox standards, which means it's, you know, the short version of it is, I don't know, 10 pages. But anyway, so the normal order these are given are gluttony, lust, avarice, anger, dejection, despondency, and then vainglory and pride. And they're understood as from gluttony to despondency, not including vainglory and pride, is a sort of a natural progression. And so they will talk about those 6 together, and they're more bodily, even though you might think anger, dejection, and despondency are not all that bodily. But vainglory and pride are, you know, more related as, you know, they're passions of the soul, almost exclusively. But I like to divide them up this way, because gluttony, lust, avarice, vainglory, and pride are all about something, right? It's like gluttony is about food, lust is about sex, avarice is about stuff, vainglory is about the praise of men, and pride is about, I want me, I don't want God, okay? Whereas these passions can be about anything, right? I can be angry because you looked at me the wrong way. I can be angry because you took the last cookie. I can be angry because you got a better test score than I did. And here's like one thing that might, like if you don't get anything else out of this, one good thing to get out of this is that these are really good warning signals that something's wrong inside me and that my desires are off kilter. You know, so like, why am I angry? And again, I was talking about this last night, but the answer is never, I'm angry because he did such and such, or because she didn't do such and such. It's like, I'm angry because I bought this lie. And, for me, when I am angry, which is all too often, it's generally because I feel humiliated, and beneath that is pride. It's like in vainglory. Like, I think I'm somebody that you ought to think is wonderful. And so, and then it's also because I feel out of control. And like, I feel like I'm responsible to know everything and do everything and be there for everybody. And my experience is that nobody gets to hold up their own corner of the universe, right? That's God's job. We just get to, try to love him and love others in the little corner where we are. And that goes back to pride and vainglory too. So for me, those are my basic problems. But I don't notice them if something isn't going on down here. If I were holier, I might, notice them because they're very bad. But since I'm not, I take these as important. Anger, dejection, despondency, I take these as, okay, something's going on. There's something wrong with how I'm looking at life and what I want. Okay, so if I wrote here shorthand what the wrong desire would be, but if you notice what I put up here is passions of wrongly directed desire. There is nothing wrong with food. There is nothing wrong with sex in marriage. I mean, so much so that is a main part of how, we understand the relationship of Christ and his church. There's nothing wrong with stuff. Maybe you don't need a Mercedes, but, stuff in and of itself, unless you've made something, that has almost only evil purposes, which is actually hard to do, there's nothing wrong with them. So the problem is that we desire them for their own sake. And when I'm desiring something for its own sake, what I'm really desiring is my own pleasure, my own comfort, my own deadening of my own pain. And so I just want to be clear, because it is heretical for an Orthodox Christian to say, there's something wrong with food, there's something wrong with sex. There's nothing wrong with them. They're created by God, they're good. So the wrong desire is that I'm desiring that thing for itself, which invariably is I'm desiring it for my own selfish, messed up desires. Okay, that's important. So I hope that's clear. So gluttony, okay, so the wrong desire, and again, wrongly directed, is food. Mother Victoria, her spiritual father, Elder Dimitri, was a very ascetic monk who could fast and fast and fast and fast. But he also often had to fill in for parish priests, sometimes for long times, and he would have to go, bless homes, after theophany in that season. And so, fathers, how many pounds do you usually gain during that time, right? Because it's like, they want to feed you out of love, right? And Elder Dimitri, who was this strenuous faster, would eat anything they gave him, whether it was Lenten or not, if it was in the Lenten period. Usually during that part it wouldn't be Lenten. But when he went to someone's house, he'd take what they would give him. He would eat it gratefully and cheerfully, and then he'd go home and fast twice as hard. And it wasn't that he was like well, God wants us to be miserable a certain amount of the time, and therefore, since I, had all this good extra stuff, well, I'm going to go home and get miserable enough to equal it out. No, it's like, he was about love of God and love of neighbor. And fasting helps us be not about us. And so, he could eat out of love. That is like an astonishingly beautiful thing that I can appreciate, but can't imagine getting very near, And so the desire for food is that if we do anything right, if we take anything into our lives and we do it with gratitude and love for God and for others, it is taking us towards Christ. And so the right desire for food is Christ, who is the heavenly bread. And a person who knows how to fast correctly knows how to feast correctly. And it's like, I'm not really good at fasting, but I'm better at fasting than I am at feasting. Because feasting is about love and joy. Whereas for me, it's like, oh, Lent's almost finished. And, which is an unusual thing, but in our monastery, because of the monastery we came from, we eat meat from Pascha until Thomas Sunday, so 1 week. And so I'm still, I'm still disordered in this thing. But the more I learn to see Christ, who is the heavenly bread, the more eating becomes part of my relationship with him. Again, I'm bad at this, obviously, but it's funny, people will ask me advice for things I'm obviously not all that good at myself, but it's like, I'm an Abbess, I must know something. And I do know things I'm not all that good at putting into practice. But so one time, somebody asked me about that, and I was like, well, what if you give God thanks for every bite you're eating? Because, there should become this very serious disconnect when you're thanking God for the 5th bite of the 4th cheesecake, right? It's like, there's something clearly wrong there. And I don't actually remember to do that much all myself, but I need to do that, and because that we should be able to see the disconnect, and we should be able to go, I want the cheesecake more than I want God, sadly enough. But I want God more than I want the cheesecake. And so again, there's nothing wrong with anything God made, but God made all these things to lift our minds up to him, and then in him to bring our minds back to the people around us, which is part of why we fast. So we be not about us, but then we have, that extra time and money that we're not spending on ourselves and our gluttony that we can give to others. And so the opposite virtue of gluttony is self-control. Gluttony is, in a certain way, the bedrock passion. Because we are born hungry. We are born needing to feed ourselves, or be fed. We can't feed ourselves. And so we're born needing help to keep us alive. And if you're the Theotokos, that doesn't get in the way of you loving God. If you're me, it really quickly gets in the way of your loving God. You know, and so you start with, well, I need food, to I need this kind of food, to I need, you know, something to protect my body, to I need Skechers, you know, to whatever it is. And it's like, I always feel bad for the poor sisters who have to do the grocery shopping, you know, because like, I'm old enough to remember that when you went into a grocery store and you wanted jam or jelly, there was apple jelly, grape jelly, and strawberry jam. And that's what there was. There was one of each. Now, you go into a store and there's like, you know, there's millions of different things, and it's like, and it has taught us to be ungrateful, you know, because it's like, and I would like to say, you know, I've never done that, but it's like, well, I wanted this one. You know, that one doesn't taste as good, or that one, you know, and sometimes there's reasonable things, like sometimes it's like, you know, well, that isn't gluten-free, and I actually do need gluten-free. I don't, but I mean, you know, if somebody does actually need that, like, that's legitimate. But we have so much that it has destroyed our ability to thank God. Or not our ability, but our actual practice, at any rate. And so, if I can control my stomach, then I can start controlling other things. But if I'm not going to control my stomach at all, I'm fooling myself with, I think I'm going to be able to control my sex drives and my greed and God knows what else. And again, I obviously do not do all that great at this, but again, it's like you move forward from where you are. You know, I'm not going to be the greatest faster in the world in the next week, in the next month, in the next year, but I can always do a little bit more and a little bit more, and, you know, and in the monastery, it's great, you know, with obedience. It's just like, okay, I see that this is a real problem of mine. You know, help me come up with some kind of a rule that will help me, you know, not be all about chocolate chip cookies. So anyway, but if we can start there, we can move on. And if we mess up, we can ask forgiveness and keep going. You know, there's always repentance. There's always the ability to do the next good thing. You're never at a point where there's nothing you can do. Sometimes the thing you can do is just say, God, I'm a complete wreck. I have no idea where to start. I don't know how to change. Help me. You know, and I mean, I've been at that place in my own life, you know, where it's like, there was nothing else to do but just beg God for help, because I wasn't finding any way to help myself. And that was with counsel, with, you know, it's within the whole context of the things the church has given, but me and my own weakness, well, just messing up and messing up and messing up, and it's just like, God help me. And I think you know, one of the things I learned when I was studying, you know, about mental illness and possession is like, the horrible thing that a person who is mentally ill or demon-possessed has is also the best thing. The horrible thing is they cannot trust their own mind. The best thing is they know they can't trust their own mind in the few moments of sanity they have. You know, we think we can. Like, we think we know, and if I just try a little harder, if I do a little different, if so-and-so would be a little bit kinder, I could do this. And that is our insanity. That's the insanity of the sane. You know, the ones who think, like, this is workable. Well, it's only workable if you want to be one of the less crazy members of the crazy ward. You know, otherwise, if I really want to be a real human being, like if I really want to love the Lord my God with all my heart and soul and mind and strength and my neighbors myself, I have to start by saying, I don't even have any idea what that really looks like. And I sure haven't done it. But this is why God came to die. And so, while I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, I know that this is a direction towards it, and that's a direction away from it. And so I have at least enough of a shadow of an idea of where I'm going that I can, with the help of God and with my spiritual father and whoever I have in my life that supports me, I at least know where the next step is, and I can start taking that. Okay, so obviously then, the lust is about a wrongly directed desire for sex. The more I've been talking to young people, the more I've realized, like I always assumed that if you grew up in the church and you were sexually involved outside marriage or improperly involved in marriage, because there are things that are not okay just because you're married, If it is not in respect of Christ and in respect of the other person, and something you could do in front of an icon of Christ, whether you're married or not, it's not wise. But, anyway, what I was going to say there was that I always assumed people knew that there were things they ought not to be doing, they just couldn't keep from doing it or they didn't care. But we live in a time right now where a lot of our young people, they do not know. And you can't be shy about talking to them, and making sure, they understand. 8, 9-year-old kids see things on their cell phones that I've never seen and that, I never want to see. And if you aren't protecting them and you're not telling them what sex is actually for and the beauty that can come from that, you're not helping. For me, one of the most beautiful things that I can ever think of is when we first got to the monastery in Calistoga. There was an older couple, I think they were in their late 80s at the time, both of them. She was almost blind and pretty frail. He was frail. And they would walk into church on each other's arms. And I still can't think of that without just, crying. I mean, and crying out of the beauty of it, They weren't perfect. I mean, I don't think they were saints. But, to get involved sexually outside of marriage, you're not going to be able to struggle through to that incredible place where these two elderly people who were physically falling apart could look at each other and see, or she couldn't look at him, but there was nothing but love, and it was so beautiful, and on a related note, I had some friends that at the time of this story, they were celebrating their 14th wedding anniversary. And I said, well, happy anniversary. And Joy, their names were Harry and Joy, and Joy said, thank you. It's been 12 of the best years of our life. And it's a good line. I mean, it's a great line. But there's a really serious truth there, which is they wouldn't have had the 12 years of the best years of their life if they hadn't gone through the 2. And I'll actually be talking about that in the next talk a little bit, in terms of one of the vows we take in the monastery, which is called stability, and how that works when you're in the world. But the reason that the church has so much to say about what not to do in terms of sex is so that it can be right, so that it can be pure, so that the power of that thing can go in the right direction. The more powerful something is, the more good it can do, but also the more harm it can do. And God made this thing that is very, very, very powerful for great, great, great good. And it isn't just about, you know, the man and the woman. It is about the child. St. John Chrysostom, he talks about the relationship of the husband and the wife being like the relationship of the Father and the Son in the Trinity. And then he talks about the child, you know, I mean, this is like, you got to be so careful how you're saying this, not to fall into like a heretical saying. But he speaks of the child, you know, as being like, he is of the same flesh, that the one flesh that they are is the flesh of the child, and he even brings in the relationship of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so, like, that's way, way close to running off of a cliff of, you know, and I don't want to, you know, go further into what all that means. But this is about love, not about just two people loving each other, but love that opens itself up to having children. And if you cannot have children, then you open yourself up to love however God gives you to do that. And so the right desire is the heavenly bridegroom. Because if you desire Christ first and foremost, who is born of the Virgin Mother, whether you are married or not married, if you're married, that sexual union is the beginning of what they call the little church, the household as the little church. And so, so the opposite here is chastity. And this is the word, there is celibacy, you know, if you're not married, but chastity isn't just that. Chastity is a pure sexual relationship within marriage, or purity of heart and body outside of marriage. And it's Saint John of the Ladder, and he's talking about a monk, but he says like a chaste monk, I'm not getting this quote exactly right, but it's something like the chaste monk burns out the earthly desires with heavenly desires. And I think if you were talking to a married couple, I think, for what it's worth, I mean, I'm no saint, but I think if you were talking to a married couple, he'd say that, you know, a chaste married man or woman transforms earthly desires into heavenly desires through chastity. So chastity isn't what you're not doing. Chastity is what you are doing. And so a monk, a chaste monk, a holy monk, isn't a withered little remains of a man. A chaste monk is a man who is burning so much with the love of God that he burns up anything that keeps him from doing that. And it would be the same thing for a chaste husband and wife. You know, that they burn up anything that would keep them from loving God and loving their neighbor. Okay, so the things one learns. So I usually have written down greed here, and apparently in maybe the English of people who are smarter than I am, and certainly in older English, I guess greed had more to do with food. And so I always think of greed just as, you know, stuff, right? But so avarice, I guess, is more the officially correct term for whatever that's worth. It might come in useful in Scrabble or something, so you never know. So avarice, the wrong desire, and again, this is always wrongly directed. There's nothing wrong with anything God made. It's just stuff, whatever it is. And the fathers say this is, in a way, it's the hardest to deal with because it should have been the easiest to deal with. You know, it's like you're born needing to eat. Your hormones are going to get to a point, you know, when you're starting to reach maturity where you are going to have, you know, these desires. You're not born with a desire for a Mercedes. You know, you're not born with a desire for the latest, niftiest, neatest computer. But when we allow those things to take root, it becomes like a horrible, you know, bramble that, you know, becomes something that God is going to help us get rid of because we aren't going to be able to get rid of it ourselves. And so it's the heavenly treasure. And all these things are Christ and His Father and His Holy Spirit, because that is where all good is. And again, like if I desired God, like anywhere near where I ought to, all these things that I'm always grasping over, you know, it's like, really? You know, you're going to obsess over your Tonka Truck collection, you know, when you have a fleet of Mack trucks? Like, really? And yet we do, because we don't see how little they are and what the treasure is that we have in Christ. And here's another one of these. If you get nothing else, here's a good thing to get. If we want to develop our love for Christ and the Father and the Holy Spirit, thankfulness is the way I know to do that. And like I'll say that to people, and they're, oh, I give thanks to God already. It's like, thankfulness is the oxygen that we need to live. And it's like, if I'm not thanking God, you know, at every minute of every day, I'm depriving myself of spiritual oxygen, you know, which I do all the time, because I forget. You know, and at the very least, you know, one thing that some of us do in the monasteries, we'll do thank you lists at the end of the day. And so it's like, if I manage to get through my whole day without remembering to thank God, at least at the end of the day I can stop and go, well, here's all the good things God did, and here's all these things I ought to be thanking God for, but I never think about. When's the last time you thanked God for gravity? But we would be having a really hard time having this conversation if gravity just decides to stop, right? And so you never thank God for all these things that are always there because you never think about them. But if we do that, and you know, it's like you take anything, like, you know, you take this bottle, so I'm assuming this is a petroleum product of some sort. And so, you know, you can thank God for the oil it came from, you can thank God from, you know, the animals that had been there, you can thank God for whatever makes the blue dye, you can thank God for whatever makes the white, you can thank Him for the people who did this for you, you can thank Him for the people who bought it, you can thank Him for the water that was in it, you can thank Him for the river the water came from. But you can take this one little thing and you can thank God for hours. But we don't. Because this is the first time I've ever given thanks to God for a plastic bottle, you know? And but that's what I try to do. I look around and I just look, oh, there's something. And I never thought about that. You know, how can I thank God for that? And the more you do that, the more you see that God is, like, He is giving us to overflowing such incredible gifts. He is keeping us alive as we talk. And the more I can do that, the more I can see that, he is enveloping me at every moment of every day with good that I never even bothered to look at. The more I do that, the more I can actually start thanking him in a real way for the 0.001% of stuff that goes wrong. Because he gives us the 0.001% of stuff that goes wrong to bring us to our senses, to make us not about all this stuff, but to make us about him, and in him, the people and the creation that he loves. And so, my brain is going here. So, the opposite virtue, there's actually two that you sometimes see, and they're sort of mirror images of each other. And they're generosity and detachment. Yeah, good enough. Detachment. Because I can't truly give you what I've never detached myself from. Did you ever give somebody a gift and then it's like, well, they've only thanked me for this 40 times. They haven't, they're not always saying that was such an amazing, wonderful thing for you to do. Or you give them a gift and they're like, they don't seem to be all that thankful, and then you're going like, well, I could use that more than they could, or whatever. And so it's like, to be truly generous, I have to be detached, right? Like I can't give you my arm because I'm attached to it, right? And so that's why, you can think of the opposite here in terms of the positive of generosity, or maybe the more negative way of thinking of it in terms of like what I need to get rid of to, keep myself from being bogged down by things that are going to mess me up and keep me from helping you. Okay, so I'll go to the next three that are in the normal, St. John Cashin's way of talking about it. But first I want to talk about vainglory and pride. How am I doing, guys? Okay. So vainglory, the opposite, the wrong desire with a person who's vainglorious is they want the praise of men. Now, of course, that includes women, right? I mean, it's not just men. Ladies and gentlemen here, how many of you have had this scenario, like where the wife comes home and the husband doesn't notice that she bought a new pair of shoes, right? And she's like, you didn't notice my shoes. And the husband, because he's a good guy, is like, okay, shoes. All right, so I'm going to be careful to notice new shoes. All right. So she comes home and she's got new shoes, and he's like, oh, good. So he's like, oh, lovely shoes. You didn't see my purse. Oh, okay, purse, shoes. And then the next time it's like, okay, I got the shoes, I got the purse. You didn't notice my dress. And of course that's a very silly way to talk about it. But the thing is like, there is no filling me up with anything anybody can give me except for God. And if you're looking for that from your husband, from your kids, from your wife, from whomever, you're putting a huge burden on them that they can't possibly fill. And you are trying to fill yourself up with what never can fill you. And that is not to say there's not a place for praise of man. And there's certainly a place for the husband to notice his wife, and to say, yeah, you look beautiful, or the wife to notice her husband, who is not interested in that you notice that he has a new pair of shoes. What he's interested in usually most of the time is, oh, you look tired. Let me, it's like acknowledging that man works hard. We don't acknowledge that enough. There are so many men who, they go to jobs they don't particularly like, and they do it because they love their families. And so there's a very important place for recognizing what others are doing. But if you want that recognition to be the thing that fills you up, you are doomed to a very unhappy life. And the people around you, unless they decide to become saints, are not going to have a very easy life either. Well, I mean, the saints aren't going to have an easy life, but they're going to have a joyful one. So the right desire is for the praise of God. And again, there is nothing wrong with the praise of men. I mean, that's why we have services for the martyrs, for the holy bishops, for the holy women, for monks, nuns, that are saints. But this cannot ever substitute for God saying, well done, thou good and faithful servant. It can't ever. And I talked about this a little bit, so I don't have to. The opposite virtue is meekness. And one of the definitions of this is a mind consistent among honor and dishonor. And that's related to, meekness as the sheathed sword, or the dog that, is going to let the little kid, is never going to hurt the little kid, but will tear apart the robber. Because if you're meek, you know who your enemy is. And your enemy is anyone who tells you it's about you, or it's about me, instead of it's about love of God and love of neighbor. So the difference between vainglory and pride, I think, is somewhat confusing. But like, pride is basically, it's about me and my will. And I was telling you the story of the monk who was so proud that he had no vainglory. Because when he's like thinking like, what do I care what these other monks are saying? It's like the stinging of flies and barking of dogs. I think I would care about what my dog thought of me, but I wouldn't care about dogs in general, and I certainly don't care about what flies think about me. And so it is possible to become so proud that we don't have vainglory. And that's very, very, very horrible and serious indeed. But most of us, these things are very mixed together. It's, I'm wonderful, or I hope I really am wonderful, even though I know underneath that I'm not. And therefore, I want you to tell me that I am wonderful so that I can deaden that pain that tells me I really am a mess. I really need help. And so obviously the right desire here is God and God's will. And the opposite virtue is humility. St. John of the Ladder, when he's talking about humility, he had this group of seasoned monks together, and he's asking all of them, what is humility? And one would say, well, it's like this, it's like this, it's like that. They all say different things. And then so St. John, he says, so I concluded that humility is a virtue known to those who have it. And I'm like, well, I don't have it, so I don't know what it is. But I know that there's no way of getting it if I'm not meek, if I'm not generous, if I'm not chaste, if I'm not self-controlled. I know that. And so these are things for us to work on. And again, you don't have to it isn't the pole vault. You don't have to pole vault to heaven. You just have to figure, wherever you are on the ladder, you just need to take the next step with God's help and with, your spiritual father's advice. So now these other three, again, these are not about anything in particular. Anger, dejection, despondency. I will talk about dejection and despondency because you might be wondering exactly what I'm talking about. Because these are passions of wrong reaction, their pure is really just, living the Christian life and doing the opposite reaction or action. I guess it's the right action, because you shouldn't be reacting, you should be acting on according to what the situation is. And because these are not specifically about certain things, you're not going to get rid of your anger if you haven't got rid of what's causing it, right? There's almost always somebody, so I just go ahead and say this anyway, because if I don't, someone will raise their hand. Isn't there such a thing as righteous anger? Yes. I've had very, very little experience of it myself. And I think also it's I think I have probably fairly often been angry at something where a little bit of my anger was righteous anger. Because we so much tend to think of 0 or 100, all or nothing. And so, if I see somebody doing something that's really hurtful to somebody, there is an anger that is appropriate. But Father Nicholas Spire, again, we were having a discussion about this, and how can you tell if something really is righteous anger? And he said something I never forgot. He said, if you feel more grief for the person who committed the sin than for the person who was sinning, then you can be sure it's righteous anger. And he doesn't mean that you shouldn't have compassion for the other person, but here's an example of this. How many of you are aware of the Coptic martyrs during the time of ISIS? Okay, so what happened was, I think it was in Libya, these Egyptian, Coptic Christians were working, I think it was Libya, if I'm wrong you can correct me, but they were working in, a different country that was close to Egypt, and there was a group that was in solidarity with ISIS who captured them and gave them, you either become Muslim or you're beheaded, and they didn't do it nicely. They made sure it was as painful as possible. It was awful. And there was one man who was a West African who was with them. I forget where he was from, but I know it was from somewhere in West Africa. And they gave him another chance. It's because you're not part of these guys. And he said, their God is my God. And so they all chose to die. They died, their last words they said is, "We are Christians." And then somebody asked the mother of one of these Coptic martyrs, what would you do if the man who beheaded your son were to come here? And she said, I would invite him in because he made my son a martyr. And so, who was most harmed when those terrorists brutally killed these men? Yeah, it's brutal. No one should ever have to go through that. but they're martyrs. And the one had a mother who, could well become a saint. Because there are stories of, the women associated with the martyrs who became saints and how they handled the deaths of their beloved, sons and husbands. So who's the most harmed here? It's the man who thinks he can go to heaven by brutally killing somebody who's trying to follow God. And so, I'm not saying you shouldn't have compassion for the martyrs. Yeah, sure, but they're way better off, and they have crowns. They have martyrs' crowns. And if that man repents, he can become one of the great saints of our time. Or any of those people. Anyone can repent. And you know what? The worse you've been, in a way, the better chance you have of becoming a great saint. Because you're not fooling yourself into thinking you're just okay, I think I'm okay. I'm not. Even though I know I'm not, there's still parts of me that haven't really taken hold of that. And so I'm certainly not saying, I don't mean this in a simplistic kind of way that like, go ahead and, you shouldn't feel sorry for the person who's being harmed. But if the person who's being harmed takes it to God and grows from it, the harm they got was very minor. And the grace they got was very, very great. And so, if my anger is filled of judgment, hatred, desire to harm somebody that really is pretty rotten, who did some really horrible things, maybe part of my anger is righteous, but a whole lot of it isn't, okay? And I'm not going to be able to do the best good I can until I've rooted out that unrighteous anger from my own heart. I can do bits and pieces. If I've gotten rid of a little bit of that, I can do a little better. And if I get rid of a little more, I can do a little better. So again, I'm never trying to say it's all or nothing. But it's sometimes helpful to know what all looks like and what nothing looks like so that we can move in the right direction. Okay, so dejection is like a crushing sadness. And, the fathers weren't using the same medical background that we do, and some of this is related to medicine the way the Byzantines would have understood it, and a lot of it is more, more spiritual. But another important thing I think we need to understand is that they didn't separate all this stuff. It's not like there's the mental part, there's the spiritual part, there's the physical part. We're beginning now to understand what everybody always knew, which is everything's related. And what I do to my body is going to affect my soul and my spirit, and what I do to them is going to affect my body and each other and everything like that. And so, there are certain people who struggle bad with depression. And sometimes there's very good reason that you're struggling badly with depression. It's like you have a huge load. And some people, seem to be like physiologically disposed towards that. And if you are, again, you take a step at a time. If it's all you can do to get yourself out of bed in the morning, you don't go like, okay, so how can I get up and do a 10-hour workday and come home and take care of my kids and make this fancy meal for my husband? It's like, if you really and truly, it's all you can do to get out of bed, maybe it's like, and I'm going to make a piece of toast for my husband. And again, if you're in that place, find a good Christian therapist, talk to your priest, about who might be able to help you. But sometimes we just get ourselves into a snit, and then our snit turns into like, everybody hates me and nobody loves me and I'm gonna go eat worms, right? But then it can become, the more we allow ourselves to get there, the harder it is to get out of it, right? So one of the explanations of, I don't know, maybe a description of dejection is ungodly sorrow, which gives you what the right reaction, the opposite virtue is, which is godly sorrow. Oops, what's going on here? There we go. It's sort of related to some of what I was talking about earlier. It's that godly sorrow, it's like I'm willing to take an honest look at what I've done wrong. And having taken an honest look at what I've done wrong, I'm willing to look at and who I've hurt. And that's godly sorrow because it's about love. It's about, I have sinned against love. And that's an awful thing to know about yourself. But it's godly because it is the place that you can build up from. And there's hope. And there's godly sorrow for the world. If you're one of these people who reads the newspaper every day and you're like, we're all going to hell in a handbasket and I can't believe this political leader did this and I can't believe that political leader didn't do that and I can't believe what's going on in the Ukraine and in Russia because I know that this person is the one who's all at fault. That's not godly sorrow. That's trying to run the universe. Or being the backseat driver. If you want to read the news, never read the news without saying, God bless so-and-so, God bless Joe Biden, God bless Donald Trump, God bless the ones you like and the ones you hate, probably a little more for the ones you hate. And then you can start getting something closer to godly sorrow, which is about love, which is about humility, which is like, I've done my own part to make this country the mess it is. I personally have. And so I can respond to that by pointing out all the people I think have had a whole lot more fault, or I can just try to be humble enough to say, okay, this is a mess and I helped make it. And it hurts the God who came and died for me, and it hurts the people he died for. But that's precisely why he came. He came to reform, to restore me, to restore all of us, to make the world the way he meant the world to be. And by my realizing the mess I've made, I can participate in the restoration. And that's godly sorrow. And there is joy associated with that. Now, despondency, there is actually an English word related to the Greek word, and I don't know how you pronounce it. And there's actually two related words in Greek, and my Greek pronunciation's horrible, so I'm not going to try. But I think it's pronounced acidi in English, and it's very hard to completely translate. It's A-C-C-I-D-I-E. But it's giving up. And there's two ways to do this. One is the giving up where you pull the covers over your head and you just don't get out of bed, right? Where you're like giving up to that degree. The other is when you're running around doing all kinds of things except for the one thing you really ought to be doing, right? So it's like, say I've had a fight with somebody and it's largely my fault and I don't want to admit it. So I spend all kinds of time doing all kinds of good, and then I look at that person and I'm like, I don't know why you're not going around doing all kinds of good. And what I'm really doing, I'm really in this place of despondency where I'm actually running around like a chicken with my head cut off, doing things that I think are good, that and may in themselves be good, so that I don't have to deal with the one thing I actually have to deal with. And I remember, I took a psychology class in high school, and the only thing I remember from my psychology class in high school was this mean little experiment they did on mice. A mother mouse cleans the nest of the babies. That mother mouse is just predisposed to clean the nest. And so what they kept doing is they kept putting junk on the nest, things that would dirty the nest that would not be good for the nest. And the mother mouse would try and try and try and try, clean and clean and clean and clean. But there was always more mess. And then she just gave up. And I don't know what's going on in her little mousy mind, but in a human mind, you've reached despondency, right? Why bother? When is this ever going to get any better? It's never worked before. When is it ever going to work again? And that is why the opposite virtue of despondency is courage. It takes courage to clean that nest one more time, knowing there's a good chance of failure. It takes courage to go back to a relationship and try to love somebody, whatever's the proper way to do that. And yeah, you'll need to talk to your spiritual father about the best way to go about it. It takes courage to go back into a situation where you know that you can get rejected again. It takes courage to take another attempt to say no to that chocolate chip cookie or that cheesecake or whatever it is, because if we fail, the more we fail, the more crushing that failure feels, And there's no point at all doing this if God is not our helper, if God cannot change our sick, pained souls. But because he can, we can take courage in his strength and courage in his love and know that he is going to heal us in the best possible way, and so there's hope. And so, that is the 8 passions, the 8 principal passions, and they're part of the cure of them is simply to practice the opposite virtue. And this is fake it till you make it again, right? It's like I don't feel very self-controlled, but I'm going to control myself here anyway. I'm going to, some of these things are either you're doing them or not doing them, but if you don't do them, you repent and you try again, and you strengthen that muscle. When I had my accident where I broke my hip, it turned out, and it's a long story, but it turned out later that, and I haven't kept up with this, otherwise I'd probably be in better shape, but I had gone to this person that used a different kind of a healing, and she told me that my main muscles that are supposed to work this leg, they don't work. And so I'm using the wrong muscles, and so she said, well, now what am I supposed to do about that? She says, well, you start by telling that muscle to move. I'm like, tell the muscle to move. And she's like, yes. And I'm like, okay. So I'm like, okay, muscle, like, move. And it twitched. And I didn't keep up, because I'm lazy. But I at least learned a lesson about that, which is like, when you have a muscle that hasn't worked for years, like you can't expect to go running marathons on it, but you can tell it to move. And there's still something in it that responds, and so as we do these things, these are spiritual muscles that most of us, haven't done a really good job of practicing. And so you try it. It's like, okay, I think this is what generosity would look like here, so I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to, see what happens. I'm going to watch my heart. And I'm going to get wiser over time, and I'm going to be able to do more of these. I'm going to be able to do them more wisely. And by God's grace, I can keep going. I usually end this in another place that I'll probably end the last talk. So I think I've said what I feel like needs to be said at this point, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to attempt to answer them.
Any questions? Oh, Sean.
So I just wanted to be sure that I heard this correctly. You said that vainglory and pride are passions of the soul.
What, vainglory and pride, what?
Are passions of the soul?
Yeah, they're more specifically passions of the soul, where the other ones have more of a physical aspect. Certainly the first three, anger, anger is certainly like, well, even if you stop and think about it, like, a dog can get super depressed, right? So there is a way in which we share these things with other animals, but we do not share vainglory and pride with animals. And by the way, the fathers have always known that we are animals. You get this idea that, people were so stupid that they didn't know that humans were animals. It's like, I don't know if it's Plato or Aristotle, but it was a general understood thing amongst the Greeks that the definition of a man is a rational animal. And the fathers have taken that rationality beyond, how they might have understood it and linked it. There was a philosophy of the logos, and it's way beyond anything I understand. But they, our rationality is a much deeper thing in the sense of it is our relationship with the one who is the logos. So you can be very, very, have a very well nous, that the eye of your soul, the mind of your heart, and be very mentally impaired. They're not the same thing. And that's why you have children who are so wise, little bitty kids who can see things that we can't, because they haven't occluded their spiritual sight the way we have. And anything else?
Any other questions? I have one.
Okay.
Can you explain how we can be angry and sin not?
Well, like yes and no. Let me get my cane here. Well, speaking as somebody who is angry and sins a lot, I can tell you the path towards healing. I can't tell you exactly, the best way to get there in all ways. But I would say the important first step is when you're angry, you stop and go, why am I angry? And some part of it probably is that this person did something unjust to hurt another person. But like I said, for me, my anger is about feeling humiliated, feeling like I am supposed to be able to do things, and maybe I am supposed to, maybe I'm not, but I felt miserably at it. And so there's pride there for me. And as long as I'm directing that anger outwards, the best I can do is keep it on a leash and hope that it doesn't wrench my arm out of my socket, you know, and get away from me anyway. And so, like I was talking about this a bit last night too, but it's like, if I just stop and I go, okay, I'm feeling really humiliated, like that helps me not direct it onto people. Okay, it helps me, like, here's the illness inside me. And, you know, other people I know, for them it is, they get angry because they feel unloved and they feel worthless. You know, in one way or another, I think they're all sort of, one way or another, they're all related to lack of trust in God. You know, because if God is my all, then whatever you do to me, my only concern would be like how I can love God and love you and get rid of the things in me that makes it hard to do that. So that's been my experience, is like to just get it off of the people. And then, and what I'm not talking about is trying to psychoanalyze myself. What I'm talking about is just getting calm enough to see what's in there. And, you know, I think it took me a while to get calm enough to see for the first time that my anger was about humiliation and this belief that I had to hold up my corner of the universe. And then it took me longer to see some of the things beneath that, and it took, you know, and I'm not like, and now I'm perfect. It's like, no. You know, I still struggle with everything I struggle with, but I struggle with it with tools that help me, and with an awareness that, you know, I've played my own role in all of this. So the more we do that, the more we wash away the unrighteous part of the anger, the more, you know, we can actually learn how to be angry and sin not, because it'll be what's left, and it will be about love. Okay?
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Should we take, maybe Athena has a question?
Yes.
Have you ever met a person that maybe you think should be canonized as a saint or has been canonized as a saint?
I don't think I've met anybody who has been canonized as a saint. I've met some people that I wouldn't be surprised if they end up, you know, being recognized as saints. You know, one of the things that, you know, from everything I've ever heard and from the people I'm thinking of that characterizes a saint is like this, well, it is their love of God and love of neighbor, and therefore they're present. You know, they're like, if you're talking to them, they're not thinking about their next appointment, which I do too often. You know, they're not thinking about, if you could just get your life together, you know, they're loving. And then, yeah, I've met a couple of people like that. And, yeah, you don't forget them. Yeah.
Any others?
So my question is kind of more clarity on thankfulness and
Okay.
like giving and receiving gifts and like, because I've heard certain things as far as spiritual fathers is if you give a gift and you don't expect to be thanked, but then other spiritual fathers like, oh, if you give a gift, you have to be thankful. You have to thank the person. So it's like,
Oh, yeah.
so it's kind of like, you know,
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's funny. Mother Victoria sometimes, when somebody would, do something kind for the monastery, she'd say like, "Oh, I hate to thank them because I'm going to take away their heavenly gift, their heavenly reward." But most of us are at a place where we need recognition. And it isn't always that bottomless hole kind of recognition, but it's just like, it's related to what we we're just talking about what a saint. It's like you see me. And like so many people feel unseen, unheard. But the thing is if somebody gives you a gift and you give them a radiant smile in reward, you might not thank them, but they know they've been seen. They know that in a way they've been thanked. I would say in most cases, just go ahead and say thank you. Give them a hug if that is the appropriate thing to do. But don't expect it for ourselves. It's like, it's like rights, right? It's like the proper way to think of rights isn't what you owe me, it's what I owe you. It's what I need to give you. I need to protect your rights. And if everyone is protecting everybody else's rights, you have a very good, sane, stable culture, And if, again, there are times, like if you're being beaten up by somebody, unless you're very, very, very saintly, you definitely need to get out of that. So there's very few all or nothing things, okay? But we, in our culture, we have understood rights as what belongs to me, what I have to protect from you. And that hasn't gone well, has it? Whereas if we, if we're looking at things as like, a child has a right not to be fooled into tearing their body apart. They do. And I need to do what I can where I am placed to do a little bit in that battle. So I think it's the same thing with thanks. It's like, I should give you thanks, and I should hopefully be wise enough to see the way that is best for you. And it might be by saying thank you, it might be a hug, it might just be praying extra for you, feeling like maybe you're the person that doesn't need to hear it. I don't suggest not telling your 6-year-olds thank you, right? I think they need to hear it. Okay, that,
Why don't we take a short break?
okay.
Vespers is at 4, so if we start again at 2:15, we should
That
have
should
enough
give
for
me
the last
time to-
session.
Yeah, I don't
Thanks.
have to